right. So we're diving into a story that everyone knows, but that also has a ton of mystery surrounding it. The story of the Magi and their journey to see the newborn Jesus. We always see them in those nativity scenes around Christmas time. But have you ever really thought about what their journey could teach us about our own lives?
Yeah. It's wild how this story, it's just from the Gospel of Matthew, but it still really captures people's imaginations even now, all this time later.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. There's way more to this story than just those traditional, Christmas decorations.
For sure. We're going to be looking at the Gospel of Matthew and what different scholars have to say about it, just to see what we can learn. What gets me is the whole idea of the three wise men, right? Were they really kings?
Well, a lot of people think that. But it's actually, not true. The Bible doesn't call them kings at all. That idea developed over time, through traditions and people interpreting it in different ways. It's pretty cool how those early church fathers, they connected the three gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They connected that to the idea that there were three visitors. And later on, people even gave them names and said they were from different continents, which, sort of symbolized the idea that Jesus's message was meant for everyone in the world.
Ah, so they became a symbol of the whole world coming together. Gotcha. But the Bible calls them Magi. What's that even mean?
So Magi, that originally referred to a priestly class in ancient Persia, and they were known for knowing a lot about astrology and astronomy. They were the real scholars of their time, always studying the stars and how they might affect, human events.
So these weren't just some guys wandering around. They were educated dudes, maybe even scientists, following a star. It makes you think about those times when you just, feel drawn to something. You feel a purpose or a direction, but you can't really put it into words.
It's true. It's they look to the sky for guidance, which brings us to that famous Star of Bethlehem. Was it a real astronomical event? Or was it a symbol with a deeper meaning?
All right. Now things are getting good. What are the different ways people interpret it?
Well, people have tried to say the Star of Bethlehem was an astronomical event, like a comet or planets aligning. But none of those really match up with what the Bible says. So some scholars think it was more of a literary device, a symbol for divine guidance.
That makes sense. I mean, even now, people are always looking for signs, looking for guidance in their lives. What are some things that pull you forward in your own journey? What are your stars, if you will?
Yeah, that's a good question. The Magi, whether they were following an actual star or, a metaphorical one, they went on a long and really hard journey to find its source. And that takes a serious amount of faith and commitment.
They went from what we now call Iran all the way to Bethlehem. That wasn't a quick trip. That makes their commitment even more impressive. And they were going to a completely foreign place with different customs and beliefs, right?
Their willingness to leave everything they knew and go on a journey like that really shows how much they wanted to find the truth. They weren't afraid of the unknown, And this is something we can all relate to in our lives, right? Stepping out of our comfort zones and facing those challenges head on so we can reach our goals.
That's totally true. But their journey wasn't always safe, was it? What was it like when they met King Herod?
Oh, Herod. So Herod was the Roman-appointed king of Judea, and he was known for being paranoid and cruel. So when the Magi came to Jerusalem asking about a newborn king of the Jews, Herod was really, really troubled. He saw this baby as a rival, a threat to his power.
I bet he did. Herod wasn't exactly the type to share power.
Nope, not at all. So he did this sneaky thing. He asked the Magi to report back to him once they found the child, pretending he also wanted to, worship him, but he actually wanted to get rid of this potential threat.
It's kind of creepy, huh? It really shows how sometimes when you're looking for the truth, it can lead you into situations that are tricky or even dangerous.
Absolutely. And this is where the Magi's wisdom and discernment really comes into play. They got a warning in a dream not to go back to Herod. They realized the danger and took a different route. It's almost like something bigger was guiding them, helping them make the right choices.
It's like they're saying we need to trust our gut, those little feelings that tell us to stay away from trouble. We all have those authority figures in our lives. And like the Magi, we need to be smart and make good decisions. Okay, but let's talk about the gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What's the deal with those offerings?
Well, each gift actually has a really deep symbolic meaning. And it tells us something about who Jesus was and what he was meant to do.
Okay, explain it to me.
So gold. Gold is obviously a precious metal, right? And it's associated with royalty. By offering gold, the Magi acknowledged Jesus not as a normal king, but as a spiritual leader.
Ah, So they weren't recognizing political power, but something much, much bigger.
Yes, exactly. And then there's frankincense. It's a fragrant resin that was used in like religious ceremonies, and this symbolizes divinity and worship. So offering frankincense was like acknowledging Jesus's divine nature.
It's almost like offering up a prayer, right? Like you're recognizing something holy and sacred. Okay, but what about myrrh? That one always seemed kind of weird for a baby.
Yeah, myrrh is definitely the most poignant of the gifts. It was a spice that they used for embalming and burial. So in a way, it was foreshadowing Jesus's eventual sacrifice and death.
Wow, that's pretty intense for a baby shower. It's like they were acknowledging his whole life from birth to death and resurrection.
Yeah, that's it. The gifts weren't just random presents. They had deep meaning, and they pointed to the real nature of Jesus's life and purpose.
I'm learning so much from this deep dive. And we're not even done with this story yet.
Not even close. There's still a lot to unpack. But it's amazing how these ancient traditions and symbols can still speak to us today.
Absolutely. But for now, let's leave our listeners with a question. What are the stars you're following in your own life? What are those things, those goals or beliefs that are guiding you? We'll keep exploring the Magi's journey and what it all means for us in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the story of the Magi. You know, we've been talking a lot about their journey and all the meaning behind those gifts they brought, but their story doesn't end there in Bethlehem, right?
Right, exactly. Like, they didn't just poof, disappear after leaving the manger. They had to go back home, back to their normal lives. But I can't imagine just going back to business as usual after something that intense.
I know, right? Matthew, in his gospel, tells us they went back home by another way. And that little phrase, it says a lot about how much their meeting with Jesus changed their whole perspective.
Yeah. Imagine those guys, these scholars, these learned men, going back to their communities with like a totally new understanding of everything. What kind of impact would that have?
It really makes you think. The story doesn't tell us everything, but it does make us wonder about how personal transformation can lead to bigger changes in the world.
It's like a reminder that when we learn and grow, it can affect other people, even in ways we don't see.
For sure. And here's something to consider. If the Magi were around today, what stars do you think they'd be following? What journeys would they be taking in our modern world to find truth and meaning?
That's a really good question. What do you think?
Well, imagine them facing all the complexities of our world, but with that same curiosity and openness they had back then. Maybe they'd be drawn to those big scientific discoveries, trying to figure out the universe or how the human brain works.
Or maybe they'd be involved in those movements for social justice, working to ease suffering and make the world a fairer place. Their whole journey seemed to be about recognizing that every person has value and deserves respect.
I think you're right. The fact that they traveled so far to a totally different place and saw a simple baby as a king shows how much they valued all people, no matter who they were or where they came from.
It makes you wonder if they'd be challenging the Herods of our time. Those people or those systems that try to control and take advantage of others.
It's totally possible. They might be out there fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, speaking out against injustice and motivating others to do the same.
I love that image. The Magi as, modern-day activists, driven by their sense of compassion and justice.
And who knows, maybe they'd find their stars in art and creativity, expressing all the beauty and wonder they found through Jesus.
Yeah, like they'd be using their gifts to encourage people, to spark hope and imagination in a world that can feel pretty dark sometimes.
Exactly. The story of the Magi reminds us that the search for truth and meaning can take all sorts of forms. It's not just about one religion or one belief system. It's a human thing, this drive to explore, to ask questions, and to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
This deep dive has really made me think. What things do I need to let go of to move forward in a new way? What are my own guiding stars, and what kind of change am I ready for?
Those are powerful questions, and the Magi story encourages us to ask them with courage, humility, and an open mind.
It's all about being open to the journey, right?
Yeah.
Even with all its unexpected turns.
And trusting that even when things feel uncertain, there's something guiding us towards something good.
This has been such a great conversation. We've gone from the historical nuts and bolts of the Magi's trip to thinking about how this ancient story connects to our lives today.
It really is amazing how these stories from so long ago can still give us insights that are relevant now.
I'm excited to see where we go next. We've talked about their journey, their gifts, their meeting with Herod, and how it all changed them. What else is there to discover?
Oh, we've just scratched the surface. In the last part of our deep dive, we're going to really look at the impact of the Magi's journey and see what it all might mean for us in the modern world. What stars would they follow today? And how would they search for truth and meaning in our time?
I can't wait to dig into that.
Yeah.
See you back here soon for the final part of our deep dive into the fascinating world of the Magi.
So we're back, still digging into the story of the Magi. We've, traveled with them from way back in the East. We saw what happened with Herod, and we even talked about what those gifts they brought really meant. But it doesn't just, end there, does it?
No, definitely not. They had to go back home, back to their regular lives.
Yeah.
But could they really go back to how things were before, after, experiencing something so huge?
It's what I keep coming back to. They couldn't just forget everything they'd seen. It had to have changed them somehow.
Absolutely. Matthew, in his gospel, says they went back home by another way. And that, I think, says so much about how deeply they were changed by meeting Jesus. It really makes you think, imagine these guys, scholars, learned men, going back to their people with a totally new understanding of, everything. What kind of impact would that have?
It's a really interesting question. We don't get all the details, but the story does kind of make us wonder, how much our own transformations can change the world around us.
Right. It's a reminder that when we discover something new, when we grow, it can affect other people, even if we don't see it happening.
And here's a thought. If the Magi were alive today, in our world, what do you think they'd be drawn to? What would their stars be now?
Wow, that's a great question. What do you think?
Well, picture them navigating our crazy, complex world with that same sense of curiosity and openness they had back then. I could see them being fascinated by, the latest scientific discoveries, Maybe they'd be studying the universe or the human brain.
Yeah, or maybe they'd be involved in those movements fighting for social justice, trying to make the world a better, fairer place. Their journey was all about recognizing that everyone matters, that everyone deserves respect.
I agree. They traveled so far to a completely different place and saw a baby, in a humble setting as a king. That says a lot about how they valued all people, no matter who they were or where they came from.
It makes me wonder if they'd be calling out the Herods of today, the people or systems that try to control and exploit others.
It's very possible. They might be out there defending those who can't defend themselves, speaking out against injustice and inspiring others to do the same.
I love that. The Magi as modern day activists fighting for what's right.
And who knows, maybe they'd find their stars in the world of art and creativity. They could use their talents to express all the beauty and wonder they found through Jesus.
They could use their gifts to inspire people, to bring hope and imagination to a world that can feel pretty bleak sometimes.
Exactly. The story of the Magi reminds us that there are so many ways to search for truth and meaning. It's not about one religion or one specific belief system. It's a human thing, that urge to explore, to ask questions, and to find something bigger than ourselves.
This whole conversation has really made me think, what do I need to let go of to move forward? What are my own personal guiding stars? And what kind of change am I really open to?
Those are really important questions to ask, and the Magi's story encourages us to approach them with courage, humility, and an open mind.
Yeah, it's all about being open to the journey, even when we don't know exactly where it's going to lead.
And trusting that even when things feel uncertain, there's something guiding us towards, something good.
So we've come to the end of our deep dive into the story of the Magi. We've gone from, unpacking the historical details to exploring what it all means for us today. It's amazing how a story from so long ago can still speak to us in such powerful ways.
I think the biggest thing we can take away from this is that the Magi weren't just characters in a Christmas story. They were seekers. They were on a quest, and they teach us about faith, courage, and how encountering something new can completely transform us.
Well said. So as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought. What are those stars calling out to you? What journeys are you meant to take? Embrace that same spirit the Magi had, that curiosity, that courage, that willingness to step into the unknown. Who knows what amazing things you might find along the way.